Well, hello everyone. I want to make a video about the experience I had with the Axonics implant procedure that I had done 6 weeks ago. And so prior to the surgery, I had a hard time finding information about the procedure in terms of what to expect, recovery, and so forth. And so I want to at least come up here and provide a video that might help provide some additional information for others who, like myself, may be looking for some different additional information as you prepare for perhaps a possible Axonics implant. So anyway, leading up to the procedure, one of the questions I had was how much time do I need to take off of work? My doctor didn't provide the information. The nurse called to schedule the appointment, and I received a packet of information in the mail, but nothing was stated about time off of work. Had a hard time getting the information. In fact, I finally had to make a trip to my doctor's office. I couldn't get the answer over the phone. Anyway, and so the nurse came back and said, well, there's no time off, just the day of the procedure. Well, it's mostly true. If I had to, I could have gone back to work the next day. At least what I found, that there's a couple caveats there. The day after the procedure, I was good enough. I needed to. I could have worked the next day. However, a couple caveats there. One, they did send me home with a prescription for opioid pain medications. I didn't need to take it, by the way. And I'll talk more about that later in terms of recovery. But if I had to have taken it, that would have potentially prevented me from working the next day. Secondly, too, after the surgery, you can't drive for 24 hours. So in other words, even if I'd worked the next day, I would have had to have got a ride to work. So obviously, in preparation as far as how much time you need to take off of work, obviously go by the guidance you receive from your doctor. In my case, I received little guidance, and so my guidance would be, if possible, take the next day off of work for recovery. But overall, the recovery was very smooth, and I'll talk more about that later. But then also, the one other note is the instructions I received in the mail for preparation for the surgery stated specifically that I'm not to bring any valuables with me, and the only thing I would need is a driver's license and insurance card. And so I showed up with those two items because that's what I was told. Well, turns out that I really needed my cell phone, because as I was doing the in-processing, the registration at the hospital where I had the surgery done, there were several phone numbers I needed for my phone. Now, I realize others perhaps who've had surgery in adult life perhaps would have known to bring a phone with you. I was just simply doing what I was told, and I haven't had surgery since I was just a child. That being said, I would highly recommend bringing your cell phone with you. But again, I was just following the instructions I received. But then also one other note, when I was doing the trial procedure, the nurse told me that for the actual implant that I would be sedated. It'd be kind of like a colonoscopy. And so when I showed up for the actual day of surgery, the anesthesiologist told me I'd be fully asleep, which I asked for clarification. Not that I really cared, but I was just kind of wondering, well, why did the nurse tell me one thing and I'll be actually experiencing something else? And what he explained it was, it's totally up to the doctor. And he said most of the doctors he works with for the Axonics implant will put the patient fully under. And so no big deal to me. I just want to share that in case, someone else find themselves in that position of wondering, I thought I would be sedated and found I'd be completely asleep. No big deal. But just point of clarification there. And then also, one of the recommendations for time of surgery. My surgery was scheduled for later in the day, later afternoon. In fact, my report time was 12:30. Typically, they would have you check in about 2 hours before the procedure. And so the instructions I received, which is for all surgical patients, was there's to be no eating or drinking after midnight. Well, given the fact that my procedure was later in the day, that meant obviously I had to go a longer period of time without eating or drinking. fact, by the time I finally wheeled me off into surgery at 3:30, I had a headache, probably from being dehydrated. Anyway, and so my recommendation would be, you may want to schedule your surgery early in the morning. That way you'll minimize the time of going without eating or drinking. And so for the timeline of the procedure, and so I mentioned how we got there at 12:30. They were running a little behind, that happens. And so I was one of the last patients for surgery that day. And so, again, they wheeled me in at 3:30. I remember being wheeled into the surgery room. And then just after they wheeled me in, the gurney came to a stop. I went to sleep. Anyway, and though I came out of surgery, I came to the procedure's only about 30 or 40 minutes. I came to somewhere around 5:30-ish or so, and then I was leaving the hospital at 6:30, so basically about a 6-hour period of time. And then also, one of the note before I get to recovery is the size of the incision. So, and this is something you may need to talk to your doctor about. So, I was under the impression that the incision, particularly where they implant the neurotransmitter, the control box in your back, I was under the impression that would be a small incision. Well, I got home and measured it. It was a full 2 inches long, or about 5 centimeters. That was on a metric system. A little longer than I expected. No big deal. It's on the waistline, so it's not that big deal to me. But I read online. You can find the manual online from Axonics. It was written for doctors, and for how to do the surgical procedure. Sorry, I'm kind of an information guru. Anyway, and so it recommends the doctor make the decision the width of the neurotransmitter, which would only be about the size of a quarter, or maybe about 2 centimeters. And so my doctor chose to do the length of the neurotransmitter, being 2 inches. That being said, if that's a concern to you about the size of the incision, you may want to have that discussion with your doctor before the surgery, so you don't have any surprises. Perhaps you can get some clarification on the size. And there was actually 2 incisions after the surgery. The one I've already mentioned for the neurotransmitter. There's one other incision near the base of the spine where they inserted the wire. It was really small, about 1/4 of an inch, or about 6 millimeters. And anyway, and that was just stitched, had like 1 or 2 stitches, I think 1. And where the longer incisions they actually used surgical adhesive over that. And it took about 2 weeks for that adhesive to come off. Now, the recovery. I mentioned already I was sent home with a prescription for opioid pain meds that I didn't need. And then also a prescription for antibiotics. But after the surgery, it felt great. In fact, on the drive home, I was expecting, it was about an hour drive home. I'm going to ride, of course. And I was fully alert, wasn't tired, hungry, but no pain, which surprised me. I'd heard of others who had this procedure who had no pain afterwards, but that was mind-boggling to me, given the fact they've just got through inserting, wires and metal boxes in my back. But there was no pain afterwards. And the next day after the surgery, the next morning, I took 2 doses of ibuprofen, just 400 milligrams each, for just minor discomfort. In fact, if I had to, I could have gone without the ibuprofen. It wasn't really pain, it was just some discomfort, which is again to be expected. But that's the only pain medications that I took for the recovery period. And so, next day after the procedure, I felt a little tired, which is normal, and also a little cold too, which is also a normal side effect of anesthesia. And then, for recovery. So the doctor sent you home, or sent me home with instructions that I was not to do any bending, stretching, twisting, or lifting anything heavier than 10 pounds, which would be about 4.5 kilograms, until my follow-up appointment 4 weeks later. Well, I like to work out, exercise, regularly lift weights, do cycling, hiking, and so I tend to be active. And so the thought of going 4 weeks potentially with no exercise just didn't sit well with me. So prior to the procedure, I did some research online trying to get a better idea of what are my parameters? You know, what are my limitations? No, and the main reason they give the limitations, the instructions, is they don't want you to do anything that would jeopardize the wiring, particularly the implant, the lead wire, and the sacral nerve. So, in case anyone out there has a similar experience that I had in terms of not really wanting to go 4 weeks to exercise, what I did, I went ahead and did my own thing. Again, follow the guidance of your doctor. But what I chose to do, which had no adverse effects whatsoever on the device or the functioning of the device. So in the first week after the procedure, I did no exercise whatsoever, and I think it was a good call. Would highly recommend that. The second week, I went on 2 different hikes. I live in an area where I have access to hiking trails, and so I first went on a shorter hike. Now again, this may vary from person to person, but for me, I tend to do longer hikes anyway. And so my first hike I did 6 miles. A few days later, I went out again for a 12-mile hike. No issues whatsoever. So then week number 3, I started doing indoor cycling, maybe 2 or 3 times, with some upper body weightlifting work. And then week number 4, and by the way, just a little caveat here, that and underlying all this was, paying attention to your body, listen to your body. For example, with like the first day doing arm work, upper body work, I tried to do a bench press, and I didn't feel real comfortable doing that even with a lower weight, and so I backed off and chose not to do that week number 3. To listen to your body. Again, not want to do anything that would jeopardize my recovery. And then finally, my 4th week, I was able to start cycling outdoors again. I have a road bike I like to ride, and then continue to upper body work as well as incorporating some weightlifting leg work. I didn't do any deadlifts or squats, but more single movement exercises. Anyway, and then let's see. Next note here. Got just 2 more points here. One, I didn't have any instructions on how often do I need to adjust the stimulation level. Well, at the hospital with a remote, of course, knew how to use it, but I didn't know when to use it. So 24 hours after the surgery, I received a phone call from the Axonics nurse. That was a very brief phone call. It was in the evening time, so I realized she was already putting in overtime. In fact, it was a 33-second phone call. Really nothing more than, how you doing? I feel fine. And that was about it. So we'll call back a week later. And so in that first week, I increased the intensity multiple times. I didn't know any better. When the next nurse called a week later, and I mentioned this to her, that's when she let me know, well, once you adjust it, it takes 2 or 3 days for your body to adjust to the new stimulation level. I was doing it too much. The remote control manual, I later learned when I read it, states that they don't even recommend adjusting yourself as far as increasing intensity. But that being said, I can only go off what the nurse told me. She did tell me that day that to don't adjust the intensity for now, keep it where it's at. And then she called back in 2 days to check on me. She never called back. That being said, I pretty much kept about that same level. I guess the long story short is I was adjusting it too much out of ignorance. So again, you may want to perhaps ask the nurse for some guidance in terms of, or your doctor, on how often you should adjust it. And on that note too, by the way, I want to mention too, maybe you may want to also keep that remote with you. For example, I went on a long bike ride one day, a 4-hour ride, and I didn't bring the remote with me, didn't think I needed it. Well, as I was on the ride, something shifted and the intensity increased just slightly. Wasn't the point of being painful per se, but it was a reminder that if it had become painful, I was going to be in a world of hurt because the remote control was back in my vehicle, and it was going to be a long, painful ride to get back to my truck if it had gotten to that level. That being said, I've only had a couple of times, 2 or 3 times so far in the last 6 weeks that the intensities, something shifted, the intensities increased a little bit. And both times it wasn't painful. In fact, I dealt with it for about a day or two, and then finally I turned it down a notch. That's just been my experience. And then finally, I'll just cover the results real quick, and I'll be done. But the device is working well for me. So I went ahead and elected to keep a urinary diary, just like I was required to do during the evaluation period. In this case, I wasn't assigned that task for this procedure, but I wanted some way of being able to keep up with the changes, or I wanted to be able to track how well it was working for me. And so I knew having some data would be helpful for my own benefit, for my own evaluation. And so that worked well, and that was a good I definitely would recommend that. And so for me, I kept a diary for 4 weeks until my follow-up appointment, and at the end I went and just analyzed the data in terms of just did a line graph too. Probably didn't have to do that part, by the way. But what I found was before the procedure, I was going to urinate about 21 times a day. Then after the procedure, during that 4-week period, I was able to reduce my times that I went to urinate down to an average of 11 times per day. So basically cut in half by 50%. And so definitely been a success for me. And then also one of the note is that for results is most days I don't feel any vibration, and I don't feel anything, but it's working. I guess I kind of wonder too, how often am I going to feel any vibration or sensation? And the only change I have noticed is during the evaluation period, I can feel the vibrations or sensations in my buttocks. And with the actual implant, it kind of shifted to a different location now in my groin. I understand some people can feel it in their leg, perhaps foot. And so for me, it changed, the location changed from the evaluation to the actual implant. Anyway, that's all for now. I just kind of wanted to give some feedback in terms of my experience, and hopefully this may be helpful to others who may be looking for additional information yourselves as you perhaps prepare for Axonics implant. So wish you best of luck. That's all from here. Bye-bye.